Hey everyone, I'm Travis and this is Aby. Welcome to Concussion, a podcast where we dive deep into the world of brain trauma, breakthrough treatments, and inspiring recovery stories. Real talk by a doctor of physical therapy specializing in concussion rehabilitation and then broken down into layman's terms so that it's easily understandable. Let's get into it.
So the Eagles beat the Commanders. And it was an interesting matchup with what we can only assume from the outside is traditional concussion recovery with Jalen Hurts versus the virtual reality training that Jayden Daniels has been doing. But this game, Jalen looked a lot more like his usual performance. So great job to the medical staff with the Eagles to get him performing with better reaction time, better decision making compared to the week before. And Jayden Daniels had a great game too. The game had a lot more elements than just quarterback completions to determine the outcome, but you got to tune in and watch and see what you thought of Jayden Daniels.
Oh yeah, I definitely watched that game. And I don't know a lot about football, but I'm certainly learning. One thing I learned this weekend was that it takes a team to win a game. One person's not going to do it. And honestly, I thought Hurts did amazing. I want to give him credit for that. And honestly, his team was right where they should have been. They were blocking when they need to block. They were keeping a nice pocket for Hurts to think things through. So I liked it. Now, Daniels, he was really threading the needle with that ball. I mean, he was throwing it right down the middle, almost through the hands of Eagles defense. He was honed in. And I can't help but to think that VR had something to do with that. The precision that he had. I feel maybe if the rest of the team were playing with the VR, the outcome may have been a little different. But great game. I learned a lot about football, and I'm looking forward to the coming weekend to see what happens with the Eagles and the Chiefs.
And then the second game on Sunday, the Chiefs versus the Bills. Unfortunately, before the completion of the first quarter, Christian Benford on the Bills unfortunately sustained a pretty serious concussion. The previous week, when the Bills were playing the Ravens, it turns out he sustained a concussion during that game with his symptoms evolving after the game. So he went through the return to play protocol that we discussed last time, and he was cleared just in time to play in this past week's game against the Chiefs. But before the end of the first quarter, he collided with his teammate Damar Hamlin, who was actually wearing a Guardian cap, but we can get into the topic of Guardian caps on a different podcast. And Christian Benford was visibly impaired after that impact. His teammates recognized that something wasn't right. They noticed by the way he was moving that something pretty serious was going on with him. And thankfully, they were able to get him medical attention right away. And the Bills medical staff, after talking with him, determined that he needed to be removed from the game right away. And you can see in the footage of him leaving the game on the golf cart that he's completely out of it. So it's hard to tell what he was feeling. Was he scared, overwhelmed? Did he even know what happened to him? He was in that dazed dream state that you explained during the first phase of your recovery. And you could just see him as they were taking him out on the golf cart. There was just a complete disconnect. And I couldn't help but think that must have been something that brought back a lot of memories for you.
Yeah, absolutely. As a matter of fact, I have a picture of me and I look exactly like that. I am sitting in my nice wheelchair in the rehabilitation center, looking out the window, and I'm just in this dazed state where I don't really know, I'm not processing too much, and certainly the same look on my face was the look he had on his face.
If you had to take yourself back to even what it was like when you had your first few conscious moments in the hospital or even towards the rehab side of things, when you were in the hospital, you had this balance between what's actually happening to me, what's a dream versus what's actually happening. And how can you kind of paint a picture for the rest of us to know what that was like for you?
Okay, Ab. So I have a little story that I'd like to tell you, and I'd like to tell everybody. And I want to get it right. So I have some of it written down, and I'm just going to go over it, and we'll start off with memories are strange things. Mine felt like fragments of a shattered mirror, but each piece was reflecting someone else back. And I couldn't tell what was real, what was dreamed, or even what I imagined. Waking up was like stepping into somebody else's story. But in the hospital, that the time didn't flow. It folded in on itself. It was like that state when you're trying to run in a nightmare. You can't get anywhere. The moments I remember, they're both sharp and blurred, vivid, and yet impossible to keep. Even now, memories are like trying to hold fog in my hands. So, let me tell you before they drift away. And I don't remember much from before they repaired my carotid arteries. My family does. The doctors do. The charts say that I was violent, combative. I was trying to escape, ripping IVs, throwing punches, even pulling out my catheter. Yeah, I pulled out my catheter, the inflated catheter, more than once. But I don't remember any of that. But I do remember, that's a different story. The dissection. My main arteries, the ones that were feeding my brain, they had been dissected in the accident. That sounds bad, right? It is, but not in the way you think. See, arteries have layers, like an onion. The inner layer had torn when my head snapped forward, stretching my neck to the limit. Hyperextension. That's what caused the tear. And that's where it gets really messed up. Like blood still pumps through the artery, but now it's slipping into that tear, building pressure. Your body, being the overachiever it is, trying to help. Platelets rush in to repair the damage. They clot, they heal. Only they're sealing off your brain's lifeline. They're saving me and killing me at the same time. Doctors say I had 4 mini strokes. 4. I didn't have time to care, because at that point, they couldn't even fix my carotid arteries. I was bleeding out from somewhere else, and it wasn't even part of the accident. That's another story entirely, and one I'll get to later if you can handle it. And then the surgery that changed everything. Days passed, blood transfusion after blood transfusion, until finally they stopped the bleeding and they got the green light to fix my carotid artery. That's when things started making sense again, or at least that's what I thought. Before that, I mostly slept. They'd put me under, induced comas, different medications, searching for the right mix to wake me up peacefully. But every time they woke me up, I fought. I fought like a man possessed. They'd wake me up and I'd tear out my IVs, swing on nurses, punch the security guard. My little brother tells me about this one guy, massive. He was jacked, he said, and I punched him right in the face. I don't remember it, but I knew me, and if I thought I was trapped, if I thought I was being held against my will, damn right I'd fight. It took them days before they found the right mix of meds, and then I was just me, or at least I thought I was. The imposter. When I finally woke up, for real, one of the first things I did was ask what happened.
but I still had a breathing tube, so I had to write it down. My brother handed me a pen. He actually put it in my hand and held paper underneath of it. And you can see that. You can see that on Instagram. But that was the easy part. The hard part, my wife looked at me and said it wasn't me. That I was an imposter. That I had stolen her husband. And that broke me. Because I was me, wasn't I? But over time, I started to understand. The old Travis, the guy who took off from that starting line that day, he never made it back. He died on the track. And then I was born. They told me to get used to the new normal, and I hate that phrase. It sounds so simple. Get used to the new normal. That sounds so simple. But there's nothing normal. There's nothing normal about that. My family still treated me like the old me. Expected me to react like he would. Expected me to act like he would. But everything irritated me about that. Everything. I mean, well, at least I wasn't combative anymore. Hell, I think I even made a few friends that I don't remember. And that's what my family says anyway. But there was one nurse I do remember. She was getting married. I told her I used to be a wedding photographer. It was late. It was around 2 a.m. We talked for hours about her wedding. But here's the weird part. Nobody else remembers her. There's no record of her ever coming into my room. But I know she was there. Back to life. My brothers told me this crazy story. They said the night before I had my carotid artery repair, I was barely responsive. Couldn't talk. Barely awake. Then they left. Visiting hours were over, and they came back the next day. And when they walked in, I was sitting up in bed. I had my phone in my hand, mid-conversation. I looked up at them and grinned. "Who let these bruisers in here?" I said. "Someone call security." Then I started laughing. We all started laughing. The day before, I was a shell, and now I was back. But like I said, memories are weird because I don't remember that. Sometimes I don't know where my memories come from or where the ones I should have went. What I do remember, tightening my gloves, taking off, saying finally, then pain, and screaming. I remember the most comfortable bed I've ever been in. Spoiler, it wasn't the bed, it was the fentanyl. The nurse getting married. My Aunt Sandy taking me to get chicken fingers.
Hearing The Walking Dead, the episode where Negan killed Glenn.
Peeing on the floor from my bed. The nurse telling me my wife was coming to get me. Getting in the car. The ride to the rehabilitation center. And that's it. To be honest, I don't even remember my family being there. Not one time. I just can't remember it.
But I know they were there. I know they were there. I know it.
I just don't remember it. That's all I have from those days. And it's not because it's been 8 years. It's because the old me never came back. He never left the track.
Now, you brought up in there a vivid memory of your wife saying that you weren't you. You were an imposter. Was that the first time that you're able to realize something happened to your brain? Because what else do you do with that comment? What other kind of injury that you know of would mean that you're not you anymore?
Well, it took me a long time to even know what that meant. I mean, as a matter of fact, I'm still trying to come to grips with what that meant. Because it sounds like something that you would just grasp right away. But things like that chip away at you slowly.
Now, a lot of our identity as a person is wrapped up in what we do for a living, whether it's a sport or a job. If you think about it, it's what we spend most of our time doing or preparing to do. So we may work 8 hours a day, which is technically a third of our day, but may spend a couple hours getting to the place where we work, more time spent preparing the clothes or the food or the materials we would need to be there, and another 8 hours spent being sure we're well rested enough to be there. So really, it's much more than just a third of our lives. So understandably, it takes up like a large portion of the picture of how we see ourselves. We oftentimes use our work or the sport to define how sharp of a thinker we are or what we contribute to the world. So much of it is tied into what we do. In your recovery, what was your biggest sense of loss in your identity? Obviously, not being able to work had a huge pull. As I explained, that's a massive influence. But aside from that, in what other aspects of how you see yourself, what changed the most for you?
You start to really look at your identity and look at who you are, who you thought you were. And you do that. You really identify essentially with the things that you do. You identify with your job and you say, okay, well, I'm a plumber or I'm a carpenter. But I don't think that you are what you say, or you're not what your job is. You're not, you are something that is far more complicated than that. And I don't know if anyone has the capability to know who they truly are, or until small pieces of who you actually are starting to be chipped away when you go through something catastrophic. Maybe it doesn't go all at once. Maybe it chips away just slowly.
Over the course of the past few years, you've been actively mourning the loss of Travis up until the motorcycle accident. Each time you encounter a new challenge or get into a new phase of life or a new chapter, there's still things that pull you back to what you would identify as the Travis you were born with. And then now you're finding ways to reestablish this Travis you are now. But if you think about it, there's no other scenario in life where you're actively mourning the loss of yourself while still facing the challenge of having to build back someone that you want to know and you want to like as you try to move forward. What's that process been like of mourning yourself and building yourself?
Mourning myself. That was it. A funeral I didn't ask for. At first, I didn't even realize I was mourning myself. I was just angry, frustrated, irritated at everyone treating me like I was someone else. How do you say goodbye to the person you thought you'd always be? I fell into philosophy, existentialism, I searched for the meaning in my own existence. I had to, because the reasons that once sustained me were gone, stripped, taken, erased. So I had to rebuild, brick by brick, thought by thought. I read and I read and read some more. I learned something paradoxical. The more you know, the more you realize you don't know. The deeper I went, the more ground beneath me crumbled. And then the abyss. I had spent so much time counting up every terrible thing, every tragedy that had ever happened to me, stacking those bricks, building my own tomb. And just before I was about to close the hatch forever, a single sentence I read before my accident, before my life shattered, suddenly appeared in my mind. Like I said, memories are weird, and this one saved my life. Those who fight monsters should be careful not to become a monster. For when staring into the abyss is staring back into you. And it was turning me into the monster that wanted to take me out. My life flashed before my eyes, the old one and the new one, and what the new one could be. So I started building again, brick by brick, thought by thought. But this time, I used the bricks of good things that happened, and not the ones of tragedy. That's how I did it.
So throughout that process, not only are you having to learn about this loss of identity, mourning who you were, finding out how you can become what you want to be, but you're also teaching everyone else in your world this new Travis. No one else knows what to expect after you've endured this injury, and you're having to balance both this internal struggle and this external struggle of teaching my family how I now think, how I now operate, teaching everyone around you these new set of expectations. Are there any instances you can remember early in your recovery that someone overestimated your capabilities, like asking you to do something physically or cognitively that was just out of reach at that point?
Oh, yeah, for sure. Like, I think I asked myself to do way more than I could. And I think I would be, so everybody kind of expected me to be able to do pretty close. Like, everybody expected me to be able to do like simple things. Like, for instance, my mom and I went out to dinner directly from the hospital. You know, not directly from the hospital, but very, very soon after I left the hospital, within a few days. And I thought, and she thought, and everybody kind of thought that, you know, we'd just go out to Ruby Tuesdays and grab some dinner and head on home, and head back to the rehabilitation. No big deal. But when you get out there and you realize that walking across the parking lot is 10 times more difficult than you expected. And I remember feeling I was really hard on myself because I wasn't walking across the street fast enough, and I didn't want to hold people up that were just driving their cars. And I'm like limping and just doing everything I can to just move, but everything was happening so much slower. And I remember thinking like, oh man, I'm holding all these people up. I hope they know that I've just been hurt pretty bad, and I'm not doing it on purpose. And then you get into the restaurant, and man, there's like 100 million things going on, and you're trying to process all that stuff. And then you have to look at the menu and read the menu and pick out what you want. And 10,000 things that you could have, and now you have to limit it. You have to narrow it down to what you want, and that's huge too. It's just like a monumental task just to go out to dinner, and my family expected me to be able to do that easy, no problem. I expected me to be able to do that, no problem, but it was certainly a problem. There was a lot going on there that I didn't expect, and it was difficult.
So even in your conversation with your family, all the things that you would typically do when you go out to eat just took a monstrous amount of focus and energy to be able to carry on a conversation. And you even had to figure out, what am I going to order for who I am now? I don't like the same things that I used to like. You have a whole new identity, even just in your appetite.
Which I swear is like one of the most crazy things. Like, okay, look, don't hate on me too much, but before I crashed my motorcycle, like, honestly, I hated mashed potatoes. I didn't like them. I didn't like anything about them. I didn't like the consistency. I didn't like the way they tasted. I didn't want anything to do with a mashed potato. And then for some reason, after my accident, I start craving. Like, for some reason, I want a mashed potatoes. Like, I want mashed potatoes for some reason. And I ate them. Like, I ordered mashed potatoes, and they were the best thing I've ever ate in my entire life. And now mashed potatoes are one of my favorite foods. Like, I love them. And the exact opposite of shrimp. I used to love shrimp, and I would go to the grocery store and I would load up on them. But now I cannot even think about eating a shrimp. That is just, no, not disgusting.
So you had new Travis in terms of interactions, new Travis in terms of appetites, new Travis in terms of conversation. So all that was just not on anybody's radar. They just thought they could expect the same of you as before you were injured. Now, to counter that, what about a time somebody underestimated your capabilities, thought you were more limited or restricted than you were? Because keep in mind, the general public and even the healthcare system, they can't see your brain injury. Was there ever a time that you can feel like somebody really put you in a position where you weren't able to show what you could actually do?
So yeah, definitely the nurses. They were like extra take care of me. They would always be coming in and checking on me, to the point where I was like, look, I'm good. Like, you don't have to come in here all the time like you're doing. Like, I'm fine. And I definitely wasn't fine, but I felt like they were just over. They were like I felt like I wanted to recover and I needed to do it on my own. And I felt like they were kind of mothering me a little bit too much. And I'm kind of an independent dude, and I like to be able to do things for myself, but I feel like a lot of the nurses would be I don't want to say overbearing, but maybe overprotective. But they did end up backing away.
And I remember you were really eager to get rid of any device like a cane or a walker or anything that had an indication that you had a physical limitation. So did your pride play a role in any of the decisions of what you took on physically or what you thought you should be able to do?
I'd never thought of it as like pride. I always thought of it just as a sense of like, I gotta do this. Like, this is what is maybe not even expected of me from like other people. Like, other people didn't really expect it, but I expected it of myself. And to show any type of vulnerability or weakness, that is something that I didn't want to allow myself to do. So anything that indicated that I was weak in any way, I would never admit to.
Now that you're far out from this, like right now, you have no physical limitations whatsoever. You lift heavy weights, you go for a run. You're at the point where no one would be able to tell that there was something that affected your mobility. But if you think back to how things were a few months out, even up to a year out, as you look back now, do you worry that any of that puts you in a risky situation?
As crazy as it sounds, I don't think I do, but I'm not saying that that's right, but I'm saying I don't think I put myself in any risky situations, but that's kind of how I think. Like, I think I'm always like 10 foot tall and bulletproof. And even after that, I didn't think of myself as limited, but emotionally, I didn't think I was limited. Logically, I was limited, but I didn't want to admit it. And I still really don't want to admit it, but I certainly was. And yeah, I don't like even saying that.
You don't like saying that you feel like your emotions or your logic were affected within those first few months of when you're trying to get back into day-to-day things?
I don't want to. I don't like to say that I was limited. I feel like I never look at myself as like limited. I always feel like I can do anything.
I gotcha. So you're saying more so that you lived into everything that you were comfortable and capable of doing at the time, not necessarily that you were living outside your boundaries in any way. You were just continuing to explore each day what you were able to take on.
Yeah, exactly. I don't think I was outside my boundaries. Well, I don't think I was, but obviously with the stories that I'm sharing now, I can see that, yeah, I certainly did push it beyond where I should have pushed it. Like when we talked about last week, like going to the mall, that was certainly, I probably should not have done that. I think maybe going out to eat, that was like, the water was pretty warm, but it wasn't boiling. And the mall was certainly like my brain reached boiling point and should have limited myself.
But it's understandable that your objective is to kind of recover in ways that you're inevitably going to find boundaries. You're going to find that boiling point at some point or another. But in an effort to recover as quickly as possible, do you feel like you were honest or were as transparent as you should have been when it came to having discussions with your doctors or psychiatrists or anybody that you encountered with what you were struggling with in those early phases?
No, absolutely not. I hid everything that I should have probably told them. I never like to admit weakness, even if I go to the doctor. Like, I don't want to admit that I have a vulnerability, even to a doctor that knows, like, if I'm in there for a broken leg, I want to say, well, I think I could probably walk on this. Like, I don't want to admit that I need help, maybe, or I'm not as strong as my mind thinks I am.
What factors do you think play into wanting to make your doctors think you're doing better than you are? And I'm asking this kind of in a retrospective sense because it's a real challenge on the healthcare side of once we get to develop relationships with folks that are struggling through these different emotional challenges, trying to redefine who they are. There's just an awful lot that's going on in their mind. But we know that when they have that follow-up with neurology or with their primary care, they're oftentimes going to answer that question as to, yeah, things are going okay, I'm getting better. If you could take an honest look back at what plays into wanting to keep that impression with a doctor, what do you think would change someone else's idea of how they could have these doctors help them by being a little bit more transparent with it? And the reality could be that you could just be afraid of what that would mean. You know, if you tell your primary care doctor that you get overwhelmed when there's a lot of things going on at once, I would be afraid that they're going to take away my ability to drive. I would be afraid that they're going to take me out of work or impose some limitation. And I could honestly see that being a reason why we wouldn't want to be as transparent as possible with doctors. But from the seat that you're in now, looking back to those early doctor's appointments and the impressions that you wanted them to have, what would you say was a big factor in terms of why you wanted to make it seem like things were going as well as possible in terms of your recovery?
Now that I think about that, one aspect is that I want everyone in society to see me as, oh man, like he's recovering quick. Like he doesn't have any problems. Like, yeah, you know, like I like to be seen as recovering quick, like because that I think indicates that I'm strong, that I am able to overcome things, maybe even easier than other people. And that the doctor, maybe he doesn't have to worry about me too much. And maybe he can even look up to me. Maybe even the doctor can look up to me and see, oh, wow, man, this guy's been through a lot. And he's saying he's all good. So he must be all good. So to maybe be a role model for even the doctor, you know, so that the doctor sees me as strong, or maybe to convince myself that I'm strong and convince myself that I can do it, or not admit to myself that I need help. And if I could, almost like, you know, you speak things into being. If you say that you're feeling down and you're feeling glum, you'll start to be like that. You'll start to feel like that, and you'll start to play into that role that you create for yourself. So maybe the opposite is true as well. I say that I'm good and I say that I'm great because I'll start playing into that role and I'll start believing it. And that takes me I do believe that that's true. I do believe that you can talk yourself into being in worse shape than you are, or you could talk yourself into being in better shape than you are, because I think the mind is a very powerful tool. And if you, for instance, like if you think about positive things, and I hate to be the guy that says, oh, just be positive, like, because that drives me nuts. Like people would tell me, so that's one thing I want to say real quick. People would tell me like how lucky I was, and that I look back, and I certainly was lucky to escape with the things that I escaped with, because there were a lot of people that certainly are not as lucky. But the last thing that I felt this was luck. Like luck is like winning the lottery, right? That's like winning. That's lucky. Coming away from this accident, that's bad luck. That's what I thought. I was like, I used to get so mad when people would tell me that I was lucky. I was like, you think this is luck? Like, no, luck is winning the lottery. This is not luck. But when you look at how well how well I've done versus some of the other people that have had concussions, you realize, man, and I get to be here speaking about this. Like, I am lucky, but it's not something that when you're dealing with it that you want to hear.
I think that's important for all of us to hear, that saying you're lucky is a really removed way of describing what happened to somebody. And it really takes away a lot of what they're going through in terms of minimizing it. You should be thankful. You turned out on the lucky side of things. And that could have been kind of the feedback that you were seeking with your healthcare encounters, of just someone recognizing how much strength it takes to get to where you are. And I think in order to get that response, you do kind of have to hide all the things that are very tough. And, I'm sure if in that same healthcare encounter, if they were to ask your wife and your daughter, how's he doing? They might not have the same response as you. But then again, they also don't know how to wrap their arms around somebody who is still trying to figure out who they are. They woke up with this new identity that doesn't have the same capacity or capabilities, and they don't know how to describe watching somebody experience this wide range of emotion and trying to find their place in the world, that otherwise they had just built this life that now they feel like they just got placed into. And a lot of that struggle was something that you didn't have a term for or a way to describe it. But you said something to me that was very powerful about how you went through your process of searching through your new identity. And I think that that's worth sharing so that people can get an idea of what was going on in your head during those first few months of trying to reconcile who is Travis now.
Finding yourself after something like this is like chasing a thief in the dark. He's out there somewhere, just out of reach. You catch a glimpse, just a flicker of a shadow turning a corner. You sprint after him, you follow his trail, but every time you get close, he's already gone. Slipping through the cracks and hiding in shadows. The moment you think you've got him, he's already 2 steps ahead, laughing as he vanishes into the night. You search every hallway, every locked door, every shattered mirror. But the closer you get, the farther he gets away. Then you start to wonder if he's even real. Maybe the self I was chasing was never who I was. Maybe I've been hunting a ghost.
And there's a lot of uncertainty with that. What if you find him and you're afraid you won't like him? What if you find him and he's not the person that you feel like you've been raised as a child to be? What if he doesn't have that same work ethic? What if he's not as funny? What if he doesn't have the same friends? What if those friends that were before the accident don't like this new guy that you find? What if this new guy is a different kind of dad or a different kind of husband? There's so much pressure on that pursuit and discovery of this new version of Travis after the head injury. You've been so willing to share your thoughts and experiences at this phase that has just so much more clarity than I'm sure it did when you were going through it. Being able to talk about it in this way is so helpful for someone who doesn't understand when this dream versus reality is going to start to fizzle into one. So thank you for being able to put emotions and stories behind what you experienced, because it means that other people can realize this is not a novel experience, that no one's ever had to go through this and figure out who they're going to be after going through something as traumatic as a brain injury, such as what you've experienced. And we talked about concussions occur on a massive continuum. So even someone who might have had a mild concussion or a moderate concussion, there's still things that they can pull from what you're saying to be able to realize this process is ongoing. Someone else has experienced it. And there's things that I can learn to be able to help get myself through to the next day and figure out what healing is going to look like for them.
I have a lot of friends that have been through hell, blown up, crushed in wrecks that should have killed them. And when we talk, we really talk. We realize something. It doesn't matter what happened. Brain injury, war zone, car crash, the emotions to fight and feel normal again, it's the same. The depression, the frustration, the feeling like you're watching your own life from the outside. I've never been depressed before, but after the accident, that changed. And I know I'm not alone. So many people, soldiers, athletes, survivors, end up here. But nobody talks about it. Nobody warns you what happens after you survive. And that's why we're having this conversation. Because maybe you're out there right now, listening to this, wondering why you don't feel lucky to be alive. And I need you to hear this. You are not broken. You are not weak. You are not alone. But this road, it's not easy, because surviving is one thing. Figuring out how to live again, that's another battle. And that's why we're here. We're going to talk about it, and we're going to get through this fight.
Yeah, we kind of just touched on kind of these initial realizations that you had early on in your recovery, but there's so much more to it. You know, you went through so many different phases. So next time we touch base, we can even talk about what things were like for you on the rehab side of things, what it meant when you kind of had to get back to life, get back to work, get back to being a part of the family. So I look forward to continuing to explore this with the amount of willingness that you've had to share, because it's meaning that other people now have something to reference, where beforehand there's no rule book, there's no protocol to follow. This is all so tough to navigate. And even though everyone's journey is going to be different, being able to hear somebody talk about it from the other side means an awful lot when you're going through these phases for the first time.
And thank you so much, Ab, for being here. I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
And it's okay to feel unlucky. Despite everyone else telling you should feel lucky, you're the one dealing with it. You're the one that has your own experience, and it's okay to feel that way. Like I said, I look forward to talking about more phases of this on our next time that we meet. And in the meantime, we'll end it with keep your head in the game, and we'll go forward from here and continue to find ways to make your experience something that other people can rely on. Thanks for sharing all this, Travis.
Thanks again for tuning in to Concussion. If you found this episode helpful, be sure to follow us and share it with someone you may think will find it useful. You can catch us on Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. For updates and behind-the-scenes content, check out our TikTok, Instagram, and X. Or join our growing community on Discord, where we dive deeper into concussion recovery and support each other along the way. All links are in the description, so see you there. And until next time, keep your head in the game and keep it protected.